He left the sacred line a single step that split the afternoon like thunder. Rifles' stilled whispers broke, and every eye at Arlington snapped to the sentinel who never breaks Sergeant Daniel Carter. A wheelchair's chrome rim trembled in the crush of tourists. A businessman's voice barked through a blinking earpiece. Between them stood duty, and the second it chose a heart over a rule. This was the moment the plaza learned honor is more than choreography. It is courage with a face. Follow this story to the end and comment the city you are watching from, so I can see how far this tale travels. Watch what happens when tradition meets a girl's hope, and a sentinel remembers why he stands today. The sun rode high above Arlington that day, casting a sharp golden glow over the white rows of headstones that stretched toward the horizon like waves of marble. Heat shimmered off the stone, and the air itself seemed to buzz with solemn reverence. Memorial Day was always crowded here, but this year it felt almost overwhelming. Thousands of men, women, and children pressed shoulder to shoulder along the pathways. Some came to mourn, some to teach their children, others simply to witness the breathtaking discipline of the Guard, changing at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Veterans wore ball caps embroidered with unit names. Tourists whispered. Cameras clicked. On the outer perimeter of the crowd, a small figure maneuvered carefully over the gravel, her wheels rattling against the stones. Emma Walker. 10 years old, sat in a worn wheelchair pushed by her mother Laura. A tiny American flag trembled between her hands. She had begged for this trip for years. Her father, a Marine who never returned from Afghanistan, had promised once to bring her here. He told her stories about Arlington, about the silent sentinels who guarded the fallen. He said they were the bravest. Laura's face was lined with exhaustion. 35 years old, but worn from juggling 2 jobs and the endless care her daughter required. Still, she had kept that promise. She drove them across Virginia that morning, weaving through holiday traffic just to arrive in time for the ceremony. Now, as she bent close to Emma, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, she whispered, "Almost there, baby. We'll find a spot." Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement, though her muscles betrayed her trembling faintly with each jolt of the chair. "Mom, do you think we'll see one up close? Like Dad said?" Laura smiled softly. "We'll try, sweetheart. We'll try." The crowd, polite at first, parted slightly for the wheelchair, but as the pair pressed closer to the viewing rail, the bodies thickened, phones lifted high, shoulders squared for a better look. Emma craned her neck, straining for a glimpse of the blue uniformed guard, marching his relentless pattern across the black mat. She caught flashes, white gloves, polished rifle, but nothing clear. Frustration curled in her stomach. This was supposed to be her moment. Then a new presence surged into their path. Jack Morrison, 45, barged through the line like a man late for a train. Bluetooth earpiece, blinking phone pressed against his jaw, words barked into the receiver with a practiced snarl. "No, I said by Tuesday. No excuses. If they can't deliver, we find someone who will." His polo shirt was wrinkled, his khakis stained from travel, but his arrogance made him taller than anyone else around. He shoved into position directly in front of Emma's wheelchair, blocking her view entirely. Laura cleared her throat politely. "Excuse me, sir. My daughter can't see. Could you step just a little to the side?" Jack flicked his eyes down, annoyance tightening his lips. He muted the call for half a second. "Lady, I'm in the middle of something important. Just move her over there." A careless wave of his hand, then his attention snapped back to the phone. "Yes, Bob, push the numbers harder." "I don't care, make them work weekends." Emma's hands clutched the flag harder. She whispered, "It's okay, Mom. I can still hear the steps," but her voice betrayed her disappointment, thin and shaky. Laura tried again, sharper this time. "Sir, please, this is Memorial Day. She's waited all year." Jack rolled his eyes. He tugged his earpiece away long enough to sneer, "I'm respecting the troops by being here, aren't I? She can watch it on YouTube later." Then he turned his broad shoulders back into position, walling Emma out completely. The surrounding crowd began to murmur. A veteran in a baseball cap muttered, "Unbelievable." A teenager started recording with his phone. The atmosphere thickened with disapproval, but no one stepped forward. Emma's eyes brimmed with tears. She looked past the shoulders and phones toward the sentinel on duty. Sergeant Nathaniel Cole, square-jawed, white gloves, Immaculate stood like a statue on the black mat, his rifle angled across his chest. She thought of her dad's words. They're like superheroes. If only he could see her now. Jack's voice grew louder, his frustration boiling over. He gestured sharply with his free hand, his foot kicking against the front wheel of Emma's chair. The jolt startled her, making her gasp. Laura yanked the chair back instinctively. "That's enough," she snapped. "You're scaring her." Silence spread like a wave, the kind of silence that suffocates. Cole's eyes, locked forward for hours, shifted, just slightly. Enough to catch the scene in his periphery. The girl's flinch, the mother's trembling hand, the businessman's looming figure. Training screamed at him to ignore it. A tomb guard never reacts, never breaks rhythm. The creed was carved into his soul. My standard will remain perfection. Yet something twisted inside his chest. A memory of his younger brother killed in Iraq. A memory of children crying at the funeral. His grip on the rifle tightened. Jack leaned closer to Emma, oblivious to the crowd's hostility. "Look, kid," he said coldly. "Life's not fair. I worked hard for this spot. Can't move for every sob story." He jerked his chin toward the guard. "See that guy just standing there doing nothing like you?" The crowd gasped. Emma's lips trembled. Laura's voice cracked. "Please, just leave us alone." But Jack kicked at the gravel again, sending pebbles scattering against the wheelchair frame. "Then move. I've got business." Cole's heart hammered. The black mat beneath him felt suddenly like a cage. His eyes locked onto Jack, and with a resolve that shattered years of conditioning, he pivoted. One step, off the line. Gasps echoed. Phones shot skyward. Every spectator felt history tilt. A tomb guard had moved. Cole's boots carried him forward in precise, deliberate strides. The rifle never wavered. The businessman's words faltered, dying in his throat as the towering figure closed the distance. Cole stopped directly in front of him, shadow falling across Jack and Emma both. Jack swallowed, his bravado draining. What is this?" "You're not supposed to." Cole's voice cut like steel, steady, calm, undeniable. "Sir, step back." It wasn't a request. The crowd held its breath. Children hushed, veterans straightened, phones shook in trembling hands recording every second. And Emma, her tears forgotten, looked up at the sentinel who had stepped off his sacred line for her. The story had only begun. The hush that followed Sergeant Nathaniel Cole's words felt heavier than the marble around them. The plaza, moments ago buzzing with the shuffle of feet and the hum of whispered commentary, seemed suspended in time. Jack Morrison's smirk faltered. He had expected no one to challenge him, least of all the soldier he'd just mocked. Now, with the tomb guard's voice resonating low and unyielding, his confidence bled away. Jack barked out a nervous laugh, trying to recover. "You don't scare me. You're just some statue with a rifle. You can't touch me." He waved his phone like a shield, eyes darting to the crowd as if their presence would save him. "What are you all staring at?" He's breaking his own rules. But the crowd did not side with him. Their faces told another story, respect, anticipation, even awe. They had seen the way Emma recoiled from Jack's careless kick, the way Laura's hand trembled. They had seen arrogance. Now they saw justice standing 6 feet tall in immaculate uniform, white gloves glowing against the late afternoon sun. Cole didn't move, didn't blink. His voice, when it came again, cut through Jack's bluster like a blade. "Sir, this ground is sacred. Your behavior dishonors it. Step back, now." Emma's eyes widened. Her tiny flag slipped from her fingers and fluttered onto her lap. No one had ever spoken for her like that since her father died. She felt a warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of pride and disbelief. Jack's bravado cracked. He took a half step back, muttering, "You can't tell me what to do. You think that uniform gives you the right?" He jabbed a finger at Cole's chest, but stopped short of contact, as if even he recognized the line he was about to cross. The veteran in the ball cap suddenly barked, "Show some respect. That soldier stands for your freedom." His voice carried, and a ripple of agreement surged through the crowd. Jack spun, eyes flashing. "Mind your own business, old man." A teenager near the rail called out, "He's the one breaking rules, not the guard." Phones rose higher, red recording lights blinking like silent witnesses. Laura placed both hands on her daughter's shoulders, shielding her. "Please," she whispered, voice barely audible over the tension. "Let's just end this." Cole's rifle shifted slightly, not raised, not threatening, just angled in a way that demanded obedience. His presence loomed larger than Jack's bravado could ever hope to match. Last warning, Sir Cole said, his tone as precise as his drill movements. "Step back." Jack's face burned crimson. His pride fought against fear, against the weight of 1,000 eyes pressing down on him. He looked at Emma again, saw her wide, fragile gaze, and something twisted in his gut, not guilt, but the recognition that he was losing. The moment stretched thin. Then Jack shoved his phone into his pocket with a huff, muttering, "Fine. Whatever. This whole thing's overrated anyway." He backed away, shoulders stiff, trying to salvage dignity. The crowd exhaled relief mingled with a low wave of murmurs. Some clapped softly. Others simply nodded as if acknowledging an unspoken truth they had witnessed something historic. A tomb guard had stepped off the line not for politics, not for ceremony, but for a child. Cole turned his boot, striking the pavement with measured force. He did not return to the mat immediately. Instead, he crouched down before Emma, lowering himself until his eyes met hers. For the first time all day, the mask of perfect stoicism slipped just slightly enough for her to see the human being behind the uniform. "Are you all right, young lady?" His voice was gentler now, stripped of command, but still brimming with strength. Emma blinked rapidly, her lips trembling. Yes, sir. Thank you." She wanted to say more, to tell him about her dad, about the promise that had brought her here, but the words tangled in her throat. Laura's own eyes shone with tears. "Thank you, Sergeant." "You didn't have to." Cole cut her off softly, his gaze still fixed on the girl. "Some things are worth breaking for." Emma's heart swelled. In that moment, she felt her father's presence, as if he were standing right behind the guard, proud and steady. Cole rose every inch of his frame, snapping back into precision. He pivoted sharply, marched to the mat, and resumed his solemn vigil as if nothing had happened. His rifle gleamed, his steps measured, yet the air had shifted permanently. Everyone knew they had witnessed a breach of tradition, but it was a breach born of honor, not weakness. Jack slunk away toward the parking lot, muttering under his breath. The cameras followed him for a moment, but then swung back to the line, to the guard who had reminded them all what true reverence looked like. Emma squeezed her mother's hand, whispering, "Mom, he saw me." Laura nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, baby, he did." The ripple of what had just happened began to spread. Within hours, the videos would surge across social media. Veterans would write about it. Journalists would debate it. But for the people standing there, no explanation was necessary. They had seen a moment where silence spoke louder than orders, where compassion outshone rigidity. And for Emma, it was more than just a spectacle. It was the fulfillment of her father's promise. The plaza returned to its solemn rhythm, the click of boots, the sweep of rifles, the hush of reverent silence. Yet beneath it all, something had changed. The tomb of the unknowns had always stood for sacrifice. Now it also stood for a child in a wheelchair who carried her father's memory in her heart, and for the guard who stepped off the line to honor her. For a long heartbeat after Sergeant Nathaniel Cole resumed his post, the plaza seemed to hold the breath it had just taken. The black mat absorbed the heat, the polished bayonet winked sunlight, and the crowd, an ocean of faces and phones, rearranged itself around a new reality. A guard had stepped off the line, not for spectacle, for a child. The shock settled into something steadier, like respect finally remembering its own shape. Emma Walker didn't know what to do with her hands. They wanted to clap, but it didn't feel like a place where you clapped. They wanted to reach for the guard again, but he was back to being a distant statue. So she did the only thing that felt right. She picked up her fallen flag from her lap, straightened the bent stick, and held it the way her father had taught her in a photo from before she could remember. Laura leaned closer, voice low. "You okay, Bug?" Emma nodded, though her eyes still glistened. "He talked to me," she whispered, as if saying it too loudly might break the spell. "He really did." "He did," Laura said. And he meant it. A teenager in a red Nationals cap had captured the entire moment. He stopped recording and immediately started replaying, swiping back and forth to the second Cole's voice cut the air. Sir, step back. His friend leaned over his shoulder, eyes wide. Dude, that's crazy. He moved. Like for real. Post it, someone else urged. People need to see that. The boy hesitated, glancing at Emma and Laura. He cleared his throat. You okay if I share this? He asked Ernest for a kid who'd been narrating under his breath a minute ago. I can blur faces if you want. Laura read his expression. He wasn't hunting for views. He'd been struck by the same thing that hit everyone here. It's all right, she said. Just be kind with it. I will. He promised, thumbs already moving. I'll write what happened, that he stepped in because it was the right thing. Farther down the rail, whispers braided into a low current of conversation. A woman asked softly, "Do they ever do that?" A veteran answered, "Almost never." Another voice added, "That's why it matters." A cemetery staffer, previously rigid with the task of crowd control, exhaled like the weight of the afternoon had leaked out through his shoes. He kept scanning for trouble, but his eyes softened each time they found Emily's blue ones. Jack Morrison had not disappeared completely. He lingered near the edge of the walkway, futilely trying to reattach his outrage like a crooked tie. Every time he tested a new line, "This is ridiculous," or "He can't do that. He found no takers." The air had shifted plates beneath his feet. The crowd didn't debate him, they dismissed him. There's a particular kind of defeat in realizing the room has decided you're a footnote. He stopped at last, staring down at the gravel that had clinked off a wheelchair like gilt. The blue blink of his earpiece dulled, and he pulled it out, a small surrender no one cared to witness. He slid it into his pocket, perhaps telling himself he chose to do so. Then he turned toward the path that led to the parking lot, muttering into a phone that had finally run out of shields. On the mat, Cole's cadence settled back into its measured geometry. 21 forward. Pause, turn, 21 back. The choreography made the plaza feel anchored again, as if the ground had polished itself and the air remembered its hymn. But inside the uniform, the discipline carried a tremor of memory, a thrum born not of fear, but of choice. That tremor had a name. Caleb. In the clearest corners of Nathaniel's mind, his younger brother still grinned with a chipped tooth from a backyard dare gone wrong. Caleb always moved like he'd borrowed extra seconds from the day fast, eager, generous with anything he could hand over. Nathaniel had been the planner, the measurer, the one who stacked chores into tidy columns. Caleb had been the one who turned those columns into fortresses and flags. When he enlisted, the recruiter wrote Marine next to Caleb's name with a pen that looked too thin to contain that word. The night before Caleb shipped out, the two brothers stood in the driveway beneath a sky so clear the stars seemed like pinholes in a dark tarp. Caleb leaned against the hood of the old Chevy and said, "You gotta stop trying to be perfect, Nate. The world ain't perfect." Nathaniel had laughed, not because it was funny, but because if he didn't laugh, he'd break. Perfect keeps things from falling apart. Caleb shook his head. Sometimes perfect is knowing when to quit pretending you're a statue. Statues don't weep. Nathaniel didn't either when the casualty officer came. He stood for his parents. He drove. He signed. He folded. He placed a hand on his father's shoulder when words turned to gravel. And when the weight needed a place to live, he gave it his muscles, his back, his square corner of the world that could be aligned and polished until one day the alignment had a name too, Tomb Guard. He hadn't considered, not deeply, that Caleb's last lesson would be the one that finally moved his feet. Laura's mind wandered while the cadence breathed around her. Memory doesn't organize itself neatly, not for a wife who learned to live with 2 time zones in her chest. There was the day Drew had shipped out blown kisses onto Emma's sleeping forehead. There was the way he'd described the tomb on the phone whenever he got the chance, his voice rough with reverence. "They stand for the ones we lost, and the ones we don't even know we lost," he'd say. "They stand so long it teaches the ground to be still." She thought she had understood back then, but watching a sentinel kneel to her daughter had redefined stillness as something alive. "You know what I'll remember?" Laura murmured, surprised to hear her own voice. That it wasn't dramatic. He didn't shout, he didn't shove anyone. He just stood the right way in the right place until it mattered. Emma nodded solemnly like a soldier accepting orders. "He stood for Dad," she said, "and for me." Her gaze swung back to the mat. Is he going to get in trouble? I don't know, Laura admitted. Truth a better companion than comfort in places like this. But I think a lot of people saw why he did it. A man in a faded ranger's cap edged closer, keeping his voice soft. Ma'am, he said to Laura, if it means anything, I served. And what that soldier did is exactly what service looks like. He looked at Emma, blinking fast. You tell people that. You tell them he stood for your daddy, and we'll all back you up. Thank you, Laura said, the words catching. Some thank yous weigh as much as a folded flag. The ceremony on the mat entered its most delicate interval. The exchange, the turning of custody from one sentinel to another. The words that the crowd couldn't hear were old as the stone requests made and granted relief taken and returned. Emma watched the choreography with the kind of attention usually reserved for magic tricks. But this was the opposite of a trick. Everything was exactly what it looked like, and somehow that honesty was miraculous. The teenage filmer's post went live. The caption wasn't fancy tomb guard steps off the line to protect a little girl. Respect. The video showed Jack crowding the wheelchair, Laura's protective hand, the scatter of gravel, and then like a drumbeat you feel in your ribs, Cole stepping off the mat, a quiet command that felt louder than any shout. Within minutes, likes began to pile. Within an hour, other angles surfaced. Arlington was becoming a prism. Every viewer saw the same light refracted their own way and came out moved. A cemetery official in a blazer approached Laura and Emma with visible care, the way you approach a candle you don't want to blow out. Ma'am, she said, crouching to meet Emma's eyes. Would you and your daughter like a better vantage? You've had a rough few minutes. We can make space up front. Her smile was professional, but her eyes told the fuller story she'd been shaken too, and had decided to carry the day forward instead of letting it sit as a bruise. That would be wonderful, Laura said, reluctant to move, but more reluctant to turn down kindness. She touched Emma's forearm. You ready? Emma's yes came out like a breath she'd been holding since her father's last promise. The official led them along the edge, and the crowd bent itself into a passage. It wasn't submissive. It was reverent the way a congregation parts when a family enters the aisle with a folded flag. Emma rolled past faces that had been strangers 10 minutes ago and now wore that particular family resemblance. Grief creates soft, resolute awake to what matters. They reached a clear stretch of rail just as Cole pivoted, paused, and began his return 21. For a fraction of a second, as his eyes swept the horizon, they seemed to touch Emma's face and quicken nothing that would register to anyone but those who had reasons to notice. Emma noticed. She sat up straighter without realizing why. Best seat in the house, the blazered official whispered, stepping back. Emma didn't answer. She was busy committing each precise step to memory, locking it next to the cadence of a voice she'd heard exactly once and would hear in dreams. She decided she'd find words later. Words for school, for her grandparents, for the picture on her nightstand where her dad's eyes were just like hers. For now, she watched. It felt like praying. Behind them, someone began to clap softly again, a ripple that rose and fell until it found the appropriate volume for sacred places. It wasn't about approval. It was about acknowledgement, the crowd agreeing aloud to something they had all understood privately. Laura looked down at her daughter, and for the first time since the phone call years ago, felt the weight of loss shift into something she could carry without shaking. Not because it got lighter, but because she now knew a stranger would shoulder a piece for a few steps when asked without words. The relief sentinel completed the exchange. The afternoon folded toward evening, and the plaza returned to its disciplined hum. But the day's story had already started walking beyond those trees, hitching a ride in pockets and feeds, carried by teenagers in ball caps and veterans with careful hands. It would not ask permission to travel. It wouldn't need to. At the rail, Emma let out a small sigh that sounded to Laura's ears like a door opening. Mom, she whispered, when we get home, can I write him a letter? I know he can't talk back because rules. But maybe he could read it on his break. I think that's a perfect idea, Laura said. And can we tell Dad about it? I mean, I know he knows, but we will, Laura answered already, feeling the shape of a new ritual, the way two people talk to a third who isn't gone, just stationed farther away. The last light slipped across the marble, turning it honey gold. Cole's heel clicked time into the stone. Emma's flag rested easy in her lap, unbent. Somewhere in Nathaniel's chest, Caleb's voice murmured approval, and the day eased itself toward its next chapter. The last echo of the relief sentinel's heel faded across the marble, and the plaza seemed to sigh as one body. Nathaniel Cole kept his chin-squared eyes fixed on the far horizon. Outwardly, nothing had changed. The uniform was pressed, the weapon gleamed, the cadence remained flawless. But inside his chest, a ripple worked its way outward, slow as a heartbeat, that refused to even out. He had crossed a line. Not the black mat, but one far less forgiving, the invisible boundary between ritual and human choice. He knew the regulations as if they were etched into bone. Tomb guards did not break step. They did not improvise. They did not engage unless order was threatened. Yet he had heard the clatter of gravel, seen a man's shadow loom too close over a child in a chair, and he'd felt Caleb's voice, a whisper carried from the grave, cut through him. Statues don't protect anyone. Nate, soldiers do. Cole had acted the way a soldier acts, and now he wondered how his decision would be judged, revered or reprimanded. From the rail, Emma was still watching him as if the precision of each step held the secret to breathing. Her small hand clutched the flagstick with a firmness that made his chest ache. Laura's profile bent close, mother and daughter leaning toward one another like branches in wind. They had been pushed, and yet here they were upright. Nathaniel fought the urge to look at them longer. A sentinel's eyes were not his own. They belonged to the duty. He marched, counted, turned. The rifle shifted shoulder in silence. The plaza listened. Training had been built for moments like this, even if it never named them. He remembered the first time he'd stepped into the guardhouse at Arlington, younger, raw, around the edges. Sergeant Major Whitaker, the old guard's bulldog of a trainer, had studied him the way a jeweler studies a flawed stone. "You want this post?" Whitaker asked. "Yes, Sergeant Major." "Then you'll earn it. Every second, every step, every seam. Out there you are not a man, you are the promise that this nation remembers its dead. You falter, you stain the stone." The weeks that followed had been merciless. Rain drills until his skin puckered. Uniform inspections where a single thread out of place meant starting over. Endless pacing until his stride became machine precise. Then came the silence drills, holding still for hours, until his breath became the only sound he could hear. Men stronger than him had washed out. Men braver too. But Nathaniel endured. Not because he loved perfection, but because he needed it. Perfection was the only place grief couldn't reach him. And yet today perfection had bent. Bent for a child with her father's eyes. Behind the lines, Whitaker himself had been present, posted near the ceremonial hut. His sharp gaze had caught everything Jack Morrison's intrusion, the gravel strike the moment Cole's boot left the mat. Whitaker's jaw flexed like granite. He didn't move, not then, but Nathaniel knew the man's memory was a ledger. There would be a reckoning later one way or another. Still, Cole could not regret. When his brother Caleb's body had come home under flag, the army had promised Laura and Emma's family too. Never forgotten. Today, in the smallest way, he had honored that. No manual could convince him it had been wrong. Meanwhile, the digital world had begun to churn. The teenager's post exploded outward in 1,000 shares. Within minutes, captions multiplied. Sentinel protects child at Arlington. Respect still lives. A former Marine wrote, "That's the old guard." "I know." A Gold Star mother replied. "He stood for my son today, too." On the plaza, phones buzzed in pockets. Some visitors discreetly glanced at screens, seeing the very moment they'd witnessed begin to trend. A murmur spread, not disruptive, but reverent, as if the crowd had collectively realized they were standing inside a story larger than themselves. Emma, oblivious to hashtags, simply raised her flag again when the sentinel pivoted. Laura's hand stayed steady on her daughter's shoulder. The mother did notice the man in the blazer, the official from the cemetery, speaking quietly into a radio. Laura's stomach tightened. Would there be consequences for the soldier? The thought curdled. How can anyone punish kindness, she wondered. But then again, the army was built on rules, not moments. Nathaniel's mind flicked back again to Caleb. to that last driveway talk. Statues don't protect anyone. The words had sat dormant for years like seeds buried too deep. Now they had sprouted in the middle of marble ground. He wondered if his brother would have grinned that crooked grin and said, "About time, Nate." The thought gave him a kind of peace. Still, duty loomed. Relief would come soon. Reports would be filed. Whitaker's voice would weigh heavier than applause, and Nathaniel would have to stand by what he had done unflinching as he had stood by the tomb itself. At the front rail, Emma leaned close to her mother. "Mom, do you think Daddy saw that?" Her voice was fragile like china. Laura swallowed. "Yes, baby, I think he did." Emma's lips pressed into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't sorrow either. "Then he knows I wasn't alone." "No," Laura whispered. "You weren't." A quiet settled thick as the summer air, but it wasn't oppressive. It was the hush of 1,000 people realizing they had all witnessed something not rehearsed, not planned, something true. And on the mat, Sergeant Nathaniel Cole carried that truth in each silent step, aware that the weight of discipline and the weight of mercy had finally met in him, and neither outweighed the other. The relief came with the sound of crisp steps echoing against marble. Another sentinel, perfect in posture, emerged from the guardhouse. The silent ritual of exchange unfolded inspection rifle transfer, the precise salutes that had been repeated countless times over decades. To the casual visitor, it was the same sacred choreography. But to those who had seen what had happened just minutes earlier, it carried a deeper current, like watching the pages of history turn with trembling hands. Nathaniel Cole executed the final motions flawlessly, but inside he felt the tremor of a man caught between two worlds. The world of unbending discipline and the world of human duty. He was relieved, formally dismissed, but he did not feel lighter. His body carried the weight of that little girl's eyes, the gratitude and the tremor in her voice when she had said, "Thank you." As he walked toward the guardhouse, every step echoed differently. He passed Whitaker, whose eyes were unreadable beneath his brimmed hat. The man gave no nod, no frown, just the steel stare of a man who knew decisions had consequences. Cole squared his shoulders. Whatever awaited, he would answer it. Inside the cool shade of the quarters, Cole exhaled. He removed his gloves slowly, as though each finger were attached to a memory. He knew the reports would be written. He knew some officer far removed from this marble ground would weigh breach of protocol against maintaining honor. But at least his conscience was clear. For once, duty and heart had aligned even if the manual disagreed. Out on the plaza, Emma couldn't stop staring at the doorway where Cole had disappeared. Her mother tried to guide her attention back to the new sentinel on duty. But Emma whispered, "He's the one, Mom. He helped me." Laura brushed her daughter's hair back gently. "Yes, honey, he did. I want to tell him about Daddy." Emma murmured, her small fingers fidgeting with the edge of her flag. Laura's throat tightened. She wanted that too. But how soldiers like him didn't mingle with families. They lived behind the line, behind rules older than Emma's lifetime. Still, a seed had been planted. Meanwhile, the ripple in the digital world surged into a wave. Jack Morrison's exit had been recorded too, the jeers, the crowd's reaction the moment the sentinel had drawn a line. Not with violence, but with presence. Already the comments multiplied. Finally, a soldier standing up for respect. This girl will never forget this day. Some users debated whether a rule had been broken, whether discipline had slipped, but most didn't care. The heart of the story was clear. Within an hour, a local news station picked up the video, playing it against somber commentary. A veteran panelist leaned forward in the studio saying, "I trained young men like that. That wasn't weakness. That was strength." Back in the guardhouse, Cole sat alone for a moment, uniform jacket, removed shirt damp against his skin. He stared at his gloves on the bench, remembering Caleb's funeral, remembering Laura clutching Emma so tiny then while the folded flag passed into their arms. He had promised himself he'd be more than a uniform, and now in one sudden moment he had lived it. The door creaked. Whitaker stepped in, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Sergeant Cole, Sergeant Major." The silence between them was taut. Finally, Whitaker spoke. "You left the mat." "Yes, Sergeant Major. You broke protocol." "Yes." "You know what that means." Cole met his gaze evenly. "I know, but I also know what it meant to her. To that little girl. Sir, with respect, sometimes a soldier has to stand for more than the page in a manual. Whitaker's jaw tightened. He said nothing, just studied him like granite carved into a man. Then he turned on his heel and left, leaving no verdict behind, just a promise of judgment deferred. On the plaza, Emma's voice carried again. Mom, can I see him? Laura hesitated. The rules seemed unbreakable, but her daughter's eyes begged. She stood, adjusted the wheelchair's brake, and whispered, "We'll try." As they approached the edge near the guardhouse, a uniformed attendant stopped them politely. "I'm sorry, ma'am, access is restricted." Emma looked down, disappointed. But then from inside, Nathaniel Cole emerged once more, his uniform jacket back on his face, a mask of discipline. His eyes, though softened as they fell on the girl. He walked over against every tradition that told him to stay separate. He knelt again close enough for Emma to hear only his voice. "You wanted to say something," he asked gently. Emma's lips quivered. "My dad, he was a soldier too. He wanted me to come here, to see, so I'd know." Her small voice caught, but she pushed on. "He said I'd never be alone. And when you stood up, I felt like he was right." Cole swallowed hard. The world around them faded, the crowd, the rules, the weight of marble and history. For a moment there was only this child, her memory, and the promise he had made to himself years ago. He placed one white-gloved hand over his heart. "Then I think he's still keeping that promise, Emma. Through you." Tears filled Laura's eyes. Emma reached out, and without hesitation, Cole clasped her small hand gently. Soldier to soldier, heart to heart. And though cameras still rolled, no one spoke. The silence returned, but this time it was filled not with ceremony but with reverence. Night had fallen softly over Arlington, and the heat of the day had given way to a velvet sky sprinkled with stars. The eternal flame at the tomb flickered faintly in the distance, guarded still by the measured cadence of a sentinel's boots striking marble. But behind the ceremonial line in the dim guardhouse, a different silence stretched, one thick with unspoken tension. Nathaniel Cole sat at a narrow wooden desk, the hum of the fluorescent light overhead drilling into his temples. In front of him lay a blank incident report. The paper was official, unforgiving, waiting for him to fill it with words that might decide his fate. He had been through battles, deployments, the loss of his brother. Yet this small square of white felt more dangerous than any battlefield he had faced. He lifted the pen, stared at the first line. Deviation from assigned protocol during relief sequence. His hand hovered. What could he write? "I chose humanity over discipline." Would that be enough? Would anyone care? A sharp knock at the door broke his thoughts. Sergeant Major Whitaker entered without waiting, his heavy boots announcing his authority before his voice did. He carried a folder under one arm, his face grim, though not angry, more like a man carrying a stone too heavy for any one person to bear. Cole Whitaker said flatly, "Sergeant Major, you know why I'm here?" "Yes, sir." Whitaker dropped the folder on the desk. "Protocol doesn't bend. The guard exists because we don't bend." "Do you understand?" Cole forced his gaze to hold steady. "Yes, Sergeant Major. But sometimes," he stopped himself, exhaled, "sometimes bending is what keeps us human." Whitaker's jaw tightened. "You've got heart, Cole. I'll give you that. But heart doesn't keep this place sacred. Precision does. Consistency does. If we let every guard decide where the line is, the line disappears." Cole looked down at the report, then back at his superior. "And if we ignore the people we're standing for what's left of the line?" The silence was knife-edged. For the first time, Whitaker looked almost weary, like a man who had fought this argument with himself years ago and lost. He turned away, muttering, "Finish the report. Higher command will want it by morning." Then he left, shutting the door behind him with a dull thud. Out in a quiet Arlington hotel room, Laura and Emma were still awake. Emma lay under the thin quilt, clutching the small flag from the plaza like it was a stuffed animal. Her eyes were bright in the lamplight. "Mom," she whispered, "do you think he'll get in trouble?" The guard. Laura stroked her daughter's hair. "I don't know, honey. The Army has rules, but he was good," Emma insisted, her voice trembling. "Daddy would say he did the right thing." Laura's throat closed. She wanted to believe that goodness was enough, that right would win. but she had lived long enough to know that sometimes rules punished kindness. Still, she squeezed her daughter's hand. Maybe sometimes doing the right thing makes new rules. Emma smiled faintly, eyes finally drooping. Laura kissed her forehead, whispering, "Your daddy saw today." And so did the world. And indeed, the world had seen. By midnight, the video had reached national outlets. The story raced through Twitter threads, headlines cropping up in real time. Sentinel breaks tradition to defend child. Heart over protocol at Arlington. Networks debated the meaning. Was it weakness? Or was it proof that even the most rigid traditions could bend toward compassion? Veterans wrote in. A former ranger tweeted, "Rules matter. But what matters most is who you protect." That soldier did right. Gold Star families posted photos of their own children, captions like, "This is why we bring them here, to see honor alive." The clip had become more than a moment. It had become a symbol. Back in the guardhouse, Cole finally put pen to paper. The words came slow, deliberate. At approximately 1400 hours, a member of the public disrupted the sanctity of the ceremonial area by approaching a child in a wheelchair in a manner deemed threatening. In response, I left the mat to intervene and re-establish order and respect for the tomb. I returned immediately to my duties. The deviation from protocol was necessary to preserve the dignity of the ceremony and safety of those present. He signed his name. The pen clicked shut like the bolt of a rifle. When he set the paper down, he didn't feel relief. Only a quiet certainty he had told the truth. Whether the army valued it or not, he couldn't say. The next morning, the sun broke clean and golden over Arlington. Visitors trickled in, unaware that behind the immaculate ritual a storm brewed. Cole stood once again on the mat, rifle-shouldered face like carved stone. Only his eyes betrayed the fatigue of a man who had spent the night battling ghosts. At the front rail, a familiar small figure appeared, Emma flag. In her lap, Laura behind her. She raised it high again when Cole passed, her smile wide, unbroken. Cole's heart clenched. Whatever the army chose, whatever judgment came, he knew that to her and to the memory of his brother, he had already done enough. He turned, carried on. The cadence of his boots rang like a promise that sometimes rules may bind a soldier, but honor frees him. The Pentagon was colder than marble. Nathaniel Cole felt it the moment he stepped through the revolving doors, his uniform pressed so sharply it looked ironed onto his skin. The summons had arrived before dawn report to headquarters. Full dress, no delays. He had known it was coming. The video had gone too far, spreading across the nation, stirring conversations the army never wanted out of its control. Now, as he followed a young aide down an endless corridor lined with portraits of past generals, Cole forced his breathing steady. He had faced mortar fire street combat nights where his heartbeat was the only sound he trusted. Yet this polished floor, this impending judgment felt heavier than all of it. The aide stopped at a door etched with brass office of the Inspector General. He motioned for Cole to enter. Inside sat 3 officers behind a long table, their uniforms heavy with ribbons, their expressions unreadable. At the center was Brigadier General Atkins, his eyes cool as steel. Sergeant Cole Atkins began. "You know why you're here?" "Yes, sir." The general clasped his hands. "You broke protocol. You left the mat. The tomb guard is not a place for improvisation. Do you dispute this, no, sir?" "Then explain." Cole straightened. His voice didn't tremble. "A man disrespected a child in a wheelchair. Her father is buried there. That space is sacred not only because of tradition, but because of the people it honors. Allowing disrespect on those steps would dishonor them more than my breaking formation." A pause filled the room. The younger officer on the left leaned forward. "Do you realize the precedent you set? Every guard could claim special circumstances. The standard collapses." Cole locked eyes with him. "Respect is the standard, sir. That doesn't collapse. It's the reason we march at all." The room went still. General Atkins studied him like a man dissecting both weakness and strength at once. Finally, he said, "We will deliberate. You are dismissed." Cole saluted, pivoted, and walked out. The door shut behind him with a finality that felt like a gavel. Meanwhile, outside the military bubble, the world had already delivered its own verdict. Morning shows buzzed with the clip. Commentators wept on air. One anchor voice, thick with emotion, asked, "Have we forgotten what these guards truly stand for, or did Sergeant Cole just remind us?" At Arlington that same morning, visitors gathered thicker than usual. Emma sat near the front rail again, her small flag clutched in both hands. When the sentinel stepped onto the mat, it wasn't Cole. Another guard had taken his shift. Emma's face fell. "Where is he, Mom?" she whispered. Laura smoothed her daughter's hair. "He'll be back. Sometimes heroes have to step away for a while." Emma blinked hard, determined not to cry. She waved her flag anyway, as if somehow Cole could see it wherever he was. By afternoon, petitions had surfaced online. Reinstate Sergeant Cole. Honor the heart of the Guard. Thousands of signatures poured in from veterans' families, even foreign allies who saw the act not as defiance, but as humanity. One message spread fastest, an open letter from Caleb Cole's old unit, the men Nathaniel's brother had fought alongside. It read simply, "He did what Caleb would have done. He honored us all." That night, Cole returned to his small apartment outside D.C. The lights of the city glowed faint through his window. He placed his rifle on its stand, his gloves folded neatly beside it. For the first time, he let his shoulders slump. His phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. He hesitated, then opened it. "You don't know me, but my daughter and I were at the tomb. I just wanted to say thank you. My husband would have been proud. Laura Jameson." Cole sat back staring at the screen. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, the tightness in his chest eased. He typed back only 3 words. He was honored. Then he set the phone down, closed his eyes, and let silence hold him no longer. The suffocating silence of marble, but one that felt almost like peace. The next morning, Arlington was busier than ever. A quiet buzz ran through the crowd, rumors of hearings, of punishments, of maybe even dismissal. But among them, one girl's voice rang clear. "Mom." Emma whispered as the relief ceremony began. "He'll come back. I know it." Laura hugged her gently. "Yes, honey, I think so too." And though the crowd hushed through the rifle snapped and boots struck marble in perfect rhythm, a deeper beat echoed beneath it. All the heartbeat of a story still unfolding. The deliberations dragged on for days. Behind closed doors, high-ranking officials argued about precedent image and the sacredness of rules. Some were hardliners, insisting that the Guard's strength was its unbending tradition. Others quietly but firmly argued that Cole's actions had already strengthened the tomb's meaning in the public's eyes. General Atkins found himself in the middle of it, reviewing the video again and again, pausing on the instant Cole left the mat. The precision broken, the momentary imperfection, and yet the look in the child's eyes, the defiant courage. Atkins rubbed his temple. He had spent his whole career defending rules, but sometimes rules were not walls. Sometimes they were doors. Outside those rooms, the city buzzed with the story. Arlington saw record crowds. Families who had never set foot on military grounds drove hours just to stand at the rail. They wanted to see the place where the Guard had bent, not out of weakness, but out of love. Reporters swarmed the gates. Veterans stood guard, not in uniform, but in solidarity, holding signs that read, "Respect is honor. Heart is discipline." Laura watched all this unfold on the news unsettled. She hadn't meant to become part of a national firestorm. She only wanted her daughter to remember her father with dignity. And yet when Emma asked every morning if her soldier was coming back, Laura found herself praying the answer would be yes. One evening, Laura's phone rang. She hesitated when she saw the number unknown again, but answered. A low voice greeted her. "Mrs. Jameson." "This is Sergeant Cole." Her heart caught. Yes, of course. I just wanted to say, I didn't mean for any of this to cause you and your daughter more grief." "You didn't," Laura said firmly. "You gave her something I never could. You showed her father's sacrifice still matters, that someone cares enough to protect it." Cole was silent for a long time. Then, "That means more than any hearing." Laura swallowed hard. "Emma keeps asking when you'll be back. What do I tell her?" "Tell her." He paused, voice heavy. "Tell her I'll stand again if they let me." The hearings dragged, but the public outcry grew louder. Television panels debated whether the Army should punish or commend. Social media fractured one side shouting about ironclad rules, the other about compassion in uniform. Through it all, Emma clung to her small flag, waiting. Each morning, she asked her mother to take her back to Arlington. Each time she held her breath at the changing of the guard, hoping the familiar figure would appear. And each time her face fell when it didn't. Until one Saturday. The air was crisp autumn creeping into the wind. Leaves skittered across the plaza as families gathered. Emma sat close to the front rail, her flag ready. The relief commander stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention?" The familiar words rolled over the crowd, and then boots struck marble. The crowd collectively inhaled. It was him. Nathaniel Cole stepped out, rifle gleaming eyes fixed ahead. The cadence returned steady, unshaken. His posture was stone, his expression unreadable, but his very presence was thunder. Emma gasped. "Mom, it's him. He's back." Laura's own eyes burned. "Yes, honey, he's back." The crowd erupted not with cheers they knew better, but with the thunderous silence of reverence. Thousands of phones lifted, but most lowered again, as if the moment deserved nothing but presence. Cole marched, turned-shouldered his rifle. His eyes swept past the crowd, fixed forward. And yet, just for the smallest fraction of a second, his gaze dipped. Toward the little girl waving a flag with both hands, her smile brighter than the flame itself. His face did not change. But in his chest, his heart steadied. He was home. Later that night, Laura tucked Emma into bed. The little girl's voice was dreamy, filled with certainty. "I told you, Mom. He came back. Daddy sent him." Laura pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, tears slipping free. "Maybe he did, sweetheart. Maybe he did." Across town, Cole sat once more at his desk. But this time, the report before him was different. A single page stamped with the Army seal, "No punitive action recommended. Return to duty authorized." Cole exhaled, shoulders finally loosening. He glanced at the photo of Caleb on the shelf, saluted softly. "We're still marching, brother. For you, for her, for all of them." And outside in the city that never truly sleeps, the story of a single broken protocol marched on, no longer just his, but everyone's. The decision spread faster than wildfire. By dawn, headlines screamed, "Sergeant Cole cleared, returns to the mat." News stations looped the footage of his return, the sound of boots on marble echoing beneath solemn voiceovers. For once, the world wasn't arguing, it was united. Commentators who had once clashed over policy now spoke with reverence. "We saw discipline meet compassion," one said, and somehow both walked taller. At Arlington, the ripple became a wave. Veterans traveled from across the country not for a protest this time, but to stand shoulder to shoulder and witness the Guard's march. Old Marines with canes, Air Force retirees with caps tilted low, Gold Star families carrying framed photos. Each one seemed to find themselves in Cole's silent stride. Emma and Laura returned as well-drawn, almost magnetically. Emma's flag was frayed at the edges from constant waving, but she refused to replace it. This one saw him the first time she insisted. "It's special now." When Cole stepped onto the mat again, the crowd's silence was electric. Emma waved so hard her small arms shook. Though he never broke formation, the bond between the child and the sentinel had become something larger than either could have imagined, something everyone around them felt. That evening, Cole was summoned once more, not to a hearing, but to an office deeper in the Pentagon, one rarely opened except for matters beyond protocol. General Atkins himself waited. "You've caused quite a storm," Sergeant Atkins said, gesturing for Cole to sit. "I didn't intend to," Sir Cole replied evenly. "No. But storms don't always ask permission." Atkins leaned back. "I want you to understand something. The Army doesn't run on sentiment. It runs on rules, discipline, precedent. But," his voice softened almost reluctantly, "sometimes one act can remind the nation why those rules exist in the first place. You've done that." Cole said nothing, unsure if it was praise or reprimand. Atkins continued, "You'll keep your post, but you should know you've stepped into a different role now. You're no longer just a guard. You've become a symbol. Symbols are heavier than rifles, Sergeant. Carry it well." Cole stood saluted. "Yes, sir." That night, Laura watched a broadcast where commentators replayed Emma's reaction, the gasp, the shout of recognition when Cole returned. The clip went viral. This is why he matters, people wrote. This is why the tomb matters. Laura turned to her daughter. Emma, do you realize you're part of this story too? Emma smiled sleepily. I'm just glad he's back, Mom. Daddy would have liked him. Laura blinked against the sting in her eyes. Yes, sweetheart, I think he would. But not everyone was pleased. Within certain circles, whispers grew. Tradition had been cracked, and some feared the crack could widen. Anonymous memos circulated through the chain of command discipline must be absolute. Some even suggested Cole's reinstatement was public relations, not principle. Cole felt the undercurrents. Fellow guards nodded in respect, but also with caution, as though standing near him was like standing too close to lightning. He trained harder, marched sharper, determined to prove that compassion had not softened his precision. If anything, it had sharpened it. One rainy morning, as Cole stepped onto the mat, he noticed Laura and Emma again. Emma's chair had been positioned closer to the front. She was pale, shivering lightly beneath a blanket. Her mother's expression was tight, worried. Cole's boots struck marble in flawless rhythm, but inside unease gnawed at him. He remembered the child's first bright smile, the strength in her eyes. Now she looked weaker. The guard cannot break, he reminded himself. The guard cannot falter. And yet, as his rifle shouldered and his eyes swept forward, his chest ached with the silent question. What if this march is the last she sees? He pressed the thought down, burying it beneath the discipline drilled into him since his first day. But the unease lingered like the drum of rain on stone, steady and inescapable. That evening, as he prepared his uniform for the next shift, his phone buzzed again. A message from Laura. Emma's been sick. The doctors aren't sure what's next. She insists on coming to watch you anyway. Just thought you should know. Cole stared at the words, the gloves in his hand suddenly feeling heavier than armor. For the first time since his brother's death, he whispered aloud into the empty room, Please, don't let me fail her. He set the gloves down with reverence as though they too were now a prayer. And somewhere in the silence he felt the weight of his oath deepen not only to the unknown soldier, but to a girl whose courage had reminded the nation what the oath truly meant. The following week brought with it a chill that cut sharper than the wind. The plaza at Arlington stood wrapped in gray skies, the trees around it bare. Yet the crowd gathered still heavier coat scarves, pulled high breath, fogging in the cold. Among them sat Emma, her blanket pulled to her chin, her eyes bright despite the shadows under them. Laura kept one hand on her shoulder, the other gripping the chair as though it anchored her to the world. Cole marched with precision, each step echoing through the crisp air. Yet every strike of his heel carried a weight that went beyond ceremony. He had seen battlefields where silence fell heavier than gunfire. He had watched comrades lowered into the ground with the sound of rifles cracking the sky. But nothing had felt as fragile as that little girl's gaze following him now, as though her strength hung on the rhythm of his boots. Later that night, Laura sat across from a doctor in a sterile office, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the gaps between their words. She's resilient, the doctor said carefully, but her body is tired. We may need to prepare for the possibility that she won't. He trailed off, glancing toward the glass where Emma slept curled on a waiting room couch with her flag clutched against her chest. Laura pressed her lips tight. She's stronger than you know, she whispered. But in her chest, fear gnawed. Word of Emma's condition seeped out quietly. First among the volunteers who worked the grounds, then to visitors who noticed her absence on days she was too weak to come. Soon stories appeared online, wheelchair-bound girl who inspired guard battles. Illness. The nation that had once argued about discipline now held its breath for her. Cole read the article in silence, jaw tight. He had faced enemies armed with rifles, had held positions under fire with his heart steady. But this he could not march against. He could only stand, and standing had never felt so powerless. One morning, as frost glistened across the marble steps, Cole stepped into his rotation. Halfway through, he heard a soft cough from the front row. His eyes flicked unpermitted, but instinct pulled him there. Emma sat pale flag, trembling in her grip, her lips moving. Though he could not hear her words, he read them. Don't stop. Something inside Cole steeled. He would not. Not now. Not ever. He carried on sharper than ever, each pivot executed with almost violent precision, as though carving his oath into the stone itself. His presence was not for tourists, not for cameras, it was for her, for a child clinging to dignity as tightly as to life itself. That night, Laura found him waiting outside the hospital wing, dressed in plain clothes, but unmistakably soldier straight. "She needs to rest," Laura said softly. Cole nodded. "I know." His eyes flicked to the door. "I just wanted to be here." Laura's voice broke. "She believes you're her father's shadow, that when you march, he's still near." Cole's throat tightened. He thought of Caleb, of laughter and desert heat, of promises whispered over radios that never reached their end. "Maybe she's right," he murmured. Laura blinked, tears falling. "You've given her more than you know." Days blended into each other, marked by the rhythm of boots on stone and the rhythm of Emma's breaths as she slept through treatments. Cole grew quieter, more inward, but his steps grew louder, echoing across the plaza with a weight that spectators felt in their bones. Visitors whispered that something had changed, that the guard seemed heavier, fiercer, as though carrying the soul of more than one fallen soldier. And perhaps he was. One evening after a long shift, Cole sat alone in his barracks. He pulled a worn photo of Caleb from his wallet, the edges curled. "You told me to watch out for the ones left behind," he whispered. "I didn't think it would be like this." He closed his eyes. The image of Emma waving her flag burned behind them. "But I won't let her fall alone. Not while I still have breath." He set the photo down, squared his shoulders, and began polishing his rifle with steady hands. Tomorrow the march would continue. Tomorrow his oath would stand. And tomorrow perhaps would be the day Emma needed him most. The morning broke with a brittle light, the kind that painted Arlington in silver and shadow. The plaza was crowded earlier than usual, word having spread that Emma would be there again. Families pressed close, reporters hung back with their long lenses, and veterans stood shoulder to shoulder in their faded jackets. The air was heavy with expectation, as if everyone understood something fragile was unfolding before their eyes. Emma was wheeled into place by her mother, wrapped in 2 blankets this time. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned bright, searching for the soldier she believed carried her father's spirit. Laura bent low, whispering, "You don't have to push yourself, honey. We can leave if you're tired." But Emma shook her head. "I have to see him, Mom. Daddy would want me to." When Cole emerged, rifle-gleaming boots clicking sharp against the marble, the crowd hushed. His every step seemed amplified, not by microphones, but by the gravity of the moment. As he passed, Emma lifted her flag high, though her hand trembled with the effort. For the briefest instant, Cole's eyes flicked toward her, the tiniest crack in the stone. A recognition. Then his gaze snapped forward again, precision restored, but everyone in the crowd felt it, the silent bond between soldier and child forged through ritual and grief. Halfway through the watch, a commotion stirred at the edge of the crowd. A tourist, impatient and careless, ducked under the rope-line phone raised, stepping directly onto the path. Gasps rippled through the plaza. Even after months of controversy, people knew the sanctity of that mat. Cole pivoted sharply, rifle cutting through the air, as his voice thundered, "It is requested that everyone remain behind the barrier." The intruder froze, eyes wide, stumbling backward under the weight of 1,000 glares. Security rushed forward, ushering him out. The silence afterward was deafening, broken only by the crisp cadence of Cole's boots as he resumed his march. Emma's eyes were wide, her flag clutched to her chest. She whispered, "See, Mom, he doesn't let anyone get close. Except me." Laura squeezed her daughter's shoulder, tears sliding unchecked. "Yes, sweetheart. Except you." That evening Cole was summoned again, this time, not for reprimand but for counsel. A colonel from public affairs leaned forward across the table. "Do you understand what you've become?" he asked. "I'm just a soldier doing my duty," Sir Cole replied, voice flat. The colonel shook his head. "You're more than that now. You're the face of something larger. That girl Emma, she's tied to you in the public's eye. The nation sees her strength through your march. Whether you like it or not, you carry both stories now." Cole bristled. "I never asked for that." "No. But sometimes duty isn't asked, it's given." Meanwhile, Laura lay awake in the hospital room where Emma slept. The monitors ticked softly, the child's breath shallow but steady. Laura scrolled through her phone, watching clip after clip of her daughter waving that small flag of Cole's stoic stride. Comment sections filled with words like courage, sacrifice, dignity. She turned the screen off, set it aside, and whispered into the dark. If you're listening, Caleb, she needs both of you. Don't let her down." The following day, Emma insisted on writing something. With trembling hands, she scrawled on a piece of notebook paper and asked her mother to fold it. "Give it to him?" Emma said. Laura hesitated. "He's not supposed to take anything, honey." "Please," Emma whispered. That afternoon, Laura slipped the folded note into Cole's hand as he passed her in the corridor near the barracks. He froze, glancing at the breach of protocol, then at the desperation in her eyes. Without a word, he slid the paper into his pocket. Later, alone in his quarters, he unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, childlike. "Dear soldier, thank you for being my dad's footsteps. Please don't stop even if I can't wave my flag anymore. Emma." Cole sat motionless, throat-burning eyes fixed on the small, crooked letters. He pressed the note to his chest, whispering hoarsely, "You have my word." And when dawn broke the next day, his march struck the stone harder than ever, each step an oath renewed, silent, relentless, eternal. Snow fell soft and steady that morning, veiling Arlington in white silence. The guards prepared as they always did, uniforms, brushed rifles, gleaming boots polished to mirrors, but the air carried an unusual tension. Even among men who never flinched, the weight of Emma's fading strength hung heavy. They had seen her in the crowd less and less, and when she was present, she looked thinner, her smile more fragile. Yet her flag still waved stubborn and proud. Cole stood in the barracks mirror, adjusting his gloves with methodical precision. His reflection stared back, eyes harder than steel jaw set. He reached into his pocket, touched the folded note Emma had given him. He carried it now like a second badge pressed close to his heart. "Steady," he whispered to himself. She needs steady. The crowd was larger than ever that morning. Word had spread through social media. Emma's doctors say she may not have much time. Families traveled across states. Strangers bundled in coats lined the plaza, some holding small flags of their own. They weren't just there for the unknown soldier, now they were there for the little girl who had taught them what honor meant. Laura wheeled Emma into the front row. Her cheeks were pale, but her eyes lit when she saw Cole emerge. She raised her flag arm, trembling, and whispered, "He came back. Mom." Just like always. Cole's boots struck marble, each cadence a drumbeat against the hush. He marched sharper than he ever had, his pivot slicing through the snowfall like a blade. He didn't dare look directly at her, but every fiber of him marched for her. Halfway through the watch, the snow thickened. A guard's duty allowed no umbrellas, no breaks. Cole's shoulders grew white, his hat rimmed with frost, but his stride never faltered. Visitors whispered in awe. Cameras clicked. Children asked their parents why the soldier didn't stop. Parents found themselves without easy answers. Emma coughed hard, her small frame shaking. Laura leaned in, panic rising, but the girl shook her head fiercely. "Don't take me away," she gasped. "Not yet. I need to see him finish." And so she stayed, snowflakes melting on her cheeks like tears. That evening, Cole sat in his quarters uniform, damp from melted snow rifle, resting across his lap. He closed his eyes, hearing Emma's cough echo in the silence. It rattled him more than any firefight had ever done. His phone buzzed. A message from Laura. "Thank you for today. She keeps saying he's marching for me. I don't know how much longer she'll hold on, but she believes you'll be there to the end." Cole read it twice, then 3 times before setting the phone down. His hands clenched into fists. The oath to guard the unknown now stretched into something else, an oath to a living child whose faith in him had become unshakable. He couldn't fail her, not now, not ever. The next day, Laura met him briefly by the hospital doors. She looked exhausted, shadows under her eyes. "She's asking for you," she said quietly. Cole stiffened. "You know I can't, I know," Laura interrupted, voice breaking. "I know the rules. But she's slipping, Sergeant, and all she wants is to hear your boots one more time." He swallowed hard, torn between the code drilled into him and the plea of a mother whose world was unraveling. Finally, he nodded once. "Then I'll make sure she does." That evening, after his watch ended, Cole walked the quiet halls of the hospital. His boots struck the linoleum with the same rhythm as they did the marble plaza. Nurses glanced up, startled by the sound, but no one stopped him. He paused outside Emma's room. The door was cracked. Inside she lay still beneath her blanket flag beside her pillow. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound. Weak as she was, a faint smile touched her lips. "You came," she whispered. Cole stood at attention in the doorway, rifle shouldered. He did not speak. He could not break the silence of his duty. But he began to march slow and deliberate across the short span of the hallway. Step, turn, turn. Emma's eyes shone. Her small hand lifted weakly toward the flag. "Daddy's footsteps," she murmured. Laura covered her mouth, tears streaming. The echo of Cole's boots filled the corridor, each strike a promise, each turn an act of defiance against the frailty of life. For a few minutes, the hospital wing became Arlington itself. The unknown was honored, the living comforted, and a little girl's faith kept burning even as the snow fell outside. When Cole finally stopped, he stood rigid, saluted, then turned to leave. But Emma's voice, faint but clear, stopped him. "Don't stop marching. Not ever." He looked back once, nodded solemnly, then disappeared down the hall. Laura knelt by her daughter's side. Emma's smile lingered even as her eyes drifted closed. "See, Mom," she whispered, "he'll never stop." And Laura knew in that moment that the guard's oath had expanded into something eternal, something that would outlast them all. The storm passed, but the cold lingered. Arlington lay beneath a brittle sky, the tomb glistening in the pale sun. Visitors shuffled in thick coats, their breath rising like smoke in the chill air. Yet beneath the frost, something new stirred a growing tide of people drawn, not only by tradition, but by the bond between one stoic soldier and a little girl who had made his march her heartbeat. Emma had been too weak to attend that morning. Laura sat by her bedside instead, reading messages from strangers across the country. Veterans wrote of their own battles with lost parents, sent photos of their children holding small flags. Teachers described classrooms where Emma's story had been told as a lesson in courage. The hospital room had become a shrine of letters and drawings, each one addressed to a girl who refused to let her spirit be buried. Laura smoothed her daughter's hair back gently. "You've touched more lives than you know, baby," she whispered. Emma's lips curved faintly. "I just wanted Daddy to be proud." "He is," Laura said, tears pressing against her throat. "And so is your soldier." At the plaza, Cole marched with relentless precision. He no longer needed to remind himself why every step carried Emma's name. Visitors could feel it. His stride struck harder, his turns cut sharper. Whispers spread among the crowd. He's different now. He's marching for her. That evening, as Cole returned to the barracks, Captain Morris intercepted him. The officer's face was carved in stone, voice low but firm. "You went to the hospital," Morris said flatly. Cole's jaw tightened. "Yes, sir. That was against protocol." "Yes, sir." Silence stretched between them, heavy as granite. Then Morris exhaled, the stiffness in his shoulders easing just slightly. "Sometimes protocol bows to humanity. Don't make me explain this to anyone else. Understood?" Cole nodded once. Understood. The next week brought a new request. Laura approached Cole quietly after a shift, her voice trembling. She asked if you would march for her birthday. It's in 2 days. She doesn't want a party, doesn't want gifts, just that. Cole's chest tightened. Her birthday. Yes. 10 years old. Laura's eyes glistened. She says she wants to hear your boots more than anything. For a moment, Cole closed his eyes. Caleb's daughter, 10. The age where laughter should drown out hospitals. The age where a child should not have to measure time in borrowed days. "I'll be there," he said, voice steady though his heart roared. 2 mornings later, the plaza swelled with people. Word had spread, as it always did now, faster than anyone could contain it. Families lined the steps. Veterans clutched their hats, children waved flags. In the center of it all, Emma was wheeled into place, a blanket tucked around her shoulders, a balloon tied to her chair. When Cole emerged, the silence was different this time. Reverent, yes, but also celebratory, as though the crowd knew they were part of something rare and fragile. His boots struck marble crisp and sharp, echoing across the frozen ground. Emma's eyes widened. "He came, Mom. He's really here." Laura bent low. He wouldn't miss it for the world. As the watch ended, Cole performed his last turn and halted before the tomb. Instead of exiting immediately, he paused. The plaza held its breath. Slowly, deliberately, he pivoted, not toward the crowd, not toward the cameras, but toward one little girl in a wheelchair. He raised his rifle, then his hand in a sharp salute. The gesture was small, lasting no more than a heartbeat. But the effect was thunderous. Gasps echoed across the plaza. Cameras clicked furiously. Tears streamed down faces hardened by years of military service. Emma's hand shot up, flag waving weakly, her smile radiant. "See, Mom?" He saluted me. Laura clutched her daughter close, sobbing into her hair. "Yes, baby." He did. That night footage flooded the internet. Headlines blared, "Tomb Guard breaks protocol for brave girl." Millions watched the clip, replaying the moment when tradition bent for compassion. Some praised the humanity, others criticized the breach of discipline, but none could deny the power of that single salute. Cole sat alone in his quarters phone, buzzing endlessly with messages. He ignored them all, staring instead at Emma's note pinned above his desk. "Please don't stop," he whispered into the quiet. Not for her, not ever. In the hospital, Emma fell asleep with the flag clutched against her chest, a smile still lingering on her lips. Laura kissed her forehead, whispering, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. He gave you the world today." Outside, the night pressed close, silent, and watchful. And somewhere between marble and hospital walls, the oath of one soldier carried the heartbeat of a child into eternity. Winter gave way slowly, the air still sharp, but the days stretching longer. With every sunrise, Emma's body weakened, but her spirit grew fiercer. She refused to let her flag fall. Even when her hand trembled, even when her lungs strained, she lifted it each time Cole's boots struck marble. Visitors whispered about her now, as if she were a sentinel herself, guarding with her heart what Cole guarded with his rifle. Laura noticed the change in her daughter's eyes, less fear, more resolve. One afternoon, after a long silence, Emma turned to her mother. "Mom," she whispered, "when I can't be here anymore, do you think he'll still march for me?" Laura's throat ached. She stroked her daughter's hair and answered firmly, "He will. He doesn't know how to stop." The Tomb Guard platoon had noticed too. Even among men who never broke their bearing, whispers carried down the barracks halls. Emma was not just Cole's burden anymore. She had become theirs. Her face appeared in their conversations, her story passed between shifts. Some of the younger guards admitted quietly that they marched harder when they saw her flag raised in the cold. Cole, though, said nothing. He carried the weight alone as if silence could anchor him. But in the quiet of the barracks, after lights out, he sometimes found himself gripping the note Emma had given him until his hands ached. One morning, the crowd was particularly thick. Veterans from across the country had come, drawn by online calls to honor Emma. They lined the plaza, shoulder-to-shoulder medals pinned to coats, wheelchairs positioned proudly in the front. Banners whispered in the wind. For Emma, for honor. Cole emerged, boots slicing the hush. The ripple of reverence was immediate. And there she was, Emma thinner now, her skin pale against the blanket, but her flag still held aloft. The veterans saluted her as he passed their hands, trembling eyes wet. For the first time, Cole broke. Just for a second, his eyes flicked toward her. It was barely noticeable, a flicker of humanity in a sea of discipline. But Laura saw it. Emma saw it. And it was enough. Later that day, Laura approached Cole at the edge of the plaza when the crowd had thinned and his shift had ended. She looked nervous, almost apologetic. "She wants to see you up close," Laura said softly. "I know it's asking a lot, but she doesn't have much time." Cole's stomach twisted. He thought of Caleb, of promises made in blood. He thought of the code that bound him. Yet he also thought of Emma's words, "Don't stop marching." He nodded slowly. "Bring her at dusk." Less eyes, then. That evening, the sun bled orange across the sky, shadows stretching long across the marble. Cole waited by the plaza steps, uniform immaculate rifle slung. Laura wheeled Emma forward. The girl's breaths came shallow, her eyes half-lidded, but when she saw him, light sparked within them. "You're taller up close," she whispered, voice rasping. Cole knelt the first time he had allowed himself to break the rigid formality. His eyes met hers, softer than Laura had ever seen. "You're the bravest soldier I've ever known," he said quietly. Emma's small hand reached out, brushing against his gloved fingers. "Promise me you won't let them forget me." His throat burned. I promise. They sat like that for only minutes, but to Laura, it felt like eternity. Emma's flag lay across her lap, and Cole's hand rested over hers, sealing an oath no regulation could contain. When the time came, he stood, saluted her formally, then marched away into the fading light. Emma's eyes closed as she whispered, "He kept his promise." "Mom, he came." Laura bent over, clutching her daughter, tears spilling unchecked. For the first time in months, Emma drifted into sleep without coughing. Peace lingered on her face. That night, Cole returned to the barracks and sat alone. He replayed her words, her touch, her plea. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. He whispered into the silence as if she could hear him still. "I'll march until my last breath, Emma. They'll never forget." And with that vow, the tomb of the unknown and the heart of a dying child became bound forever by footsteps, echoing into eternity. Spring crept slowly into Virginia, but Emma's strength did not return with the blossoms. The doctors were honest with Laura, brutally so. There were no more treatments left, no more experimental regimens. All they could do was keep her comfortable. Still, Emma insisted on being taken to Arlington when she could. Each time, Laura bundled her in blankets, tucked oxygen tubes carefully, and wheeled her into the place that had become more sacred to her than the walls of the church. The plaza filled differently now. People no longer came only to witness the eternal watch. They came to see Emma, to catch a glimpse of her waving flag, to feel the gravity of her stubborn presence. Veterans leaned on canes, parents lifted their children onto shoulders, and strangers whispered prayers when they saw her fragile form lifted from the car. Cole noticed it too. He had always marched for the nameless, for the faceless who never came home. Now he marched for one name he could not forget. He told himself he was still stone, still bound by duty. But deep down, with every click of his heel, he carried Emma. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling watch, Laura found him in the shade near the barracks. She looked tired, her voice strained. "She asked for you again," Laura said softly. "Not just to see you march, to talk, to say goodbye." Cole's heart froze. "Goodbye." Laura nodded, eyes red. "They don't think she'll last much longer." For the first time in years, Cole felt his breath catch in his chest. Caleb's daughter, the girl who had given him back his humanity, was fading, and there was nothing his rifle or his training could do to stop it. That evening, Laura wheeled Emma into the quiet gardens behind the hospital. The air smelled faintly of lilacs, and the setting sun painted the world in amber. Cole was already there, standing ramrod straight, as though his presence alone could guard her final moments. Emma's eyes lit weakly when she saw him. "Soldier," she whispered. He knelt again, close enough to hear her shallow breaths. "I'm here." She reached for his hand, her fingers barely curling around his glove. Did you ever know my daddy?" The question struck like a blade. For months he had carried the truth in silence. Now, looking into those fading eyes, he could not lie. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "I did." Emma's lips quivered into a tiny smile. "Then you already know how much I love him." Tears burned at the corners of Cole's eyes. "He loved you more than anything, Emma." Laura pressed her hand to her mouth, shoulders shaking. She had suspected, of course, there was too much in Cole's gaze, too much familiarity in his words. But hearing it aloud broke something open in her heart. Emma coughed weakly, then whispered, "Promise me something." Anything Cole said. "Keep marching, even when I'm gone. March for Daddy. March for me." Cole bowed, his head voice thick. "I swear it." Her eyes fluttered closed, her hand still resting in his. A faint smile lingered on her lips. Then, "I can rest." The following morning, Emma did not wake. The news rippled through the community like a cold wind. Veterans wept openly, strangers left flowers at the hospital doors, and the plaza outside Arlington filled with flags and candles. Her story had traveled farther than anyone realized. Schools across the country held moments of silence, church bells tolled in small towns, and online tributes poured in by the thousands. Cole stood in his quarters, staring at her note pinned above his desk. His chest felt hollow, as though some part of him had been buried with her. Yet when the order came to stand his next watch, he obeyed. That afternoon, the plaza was packed beyond capacity. Families pressed shoulder to shoulder. Veterans in full dress stood rigid with respect. They weren't there only for the tomb, they were there for Emma. Cole emerged, rifle gleaming, steps precise. Every click of his heel echoed like thunder. He did not look left or right, but the crowd knew. They could feel it in the sharpness of his turns, the weight of his cadence. He was marching for her now. At the far end of the crowd, Laura stood with tears streaming down her face, clutching Emma's small flag against her chest. Cole's eyes never faltered, but as he passed, his chin lifted just slightly, a silent vow renewed. When the watch ended, Cole halted before the tomb. His salute was sharper, longer, heavier than ever before. For a heartbeat, the plaza was utterly silent. Then, almost as one, the crowd raised their hands in salute, not to him, but to the memory of the little girl who had taught them all what courage looked like. Laura pressed the flag to her heart, whispering into the wind, "She sees you, Emma. She sees him." And the soldier marched away, boots ringing out into eternity, carrying the weight of a promise he would never break. The weeks after Emma's passing felt heavier than winter ever had. Arlington was quieter, yet somehow fuller. Visitors came not only to honor the unknown dead, but to whisper Emma's name to trace the place where her small flag once waved. A tiny photograph of her laminated and left against the marble became a beacon. Guards never acknowledged it, they weren't permitted, but none dared remove it. It stayed a silent sentinel beside the stone. Laura moved through her days in a haze. The house felt unbearable, rooms too large and too empty. She found herself driving to Arlington without thinking, parking in the same spot, hands shaking on the wheel. Each time she carried Emma's flag, folding and unfolding it until the fabric was soft as silk. And always she waited. Cole noticed her presence each shift. She never stepped past the line, never spoke out. She simply stood, flag clutched to her chest, eyes on him. And every time his boots struck marble, he marched harder, straighter, sharper, as though the sound alone could tell her, "I haven't forgotten." One evening, Laura approached him near the barracks. The sky was heavy with clouds, the air carrying the promise of rain. She looked nervous, as if stepping into forbidden ground. "She left you something," Laura said softly. From her purse, she pulled a small cloth bag. "She asked me to give it when the time was right." Cole's jaw tightened. He accepted the bag with reverence, opening it slowly. Inside was a child's bracelet, the kind made from cheap beads, the letters strung to spell hope. For the first time in years, Cole's composure cracked. His chest heaved and he pressed the bracelet into his palm as if it were made of gold. "She carried this," Laura nodded, eyes filling, "every day, until the end." He closed his fist around it. "Then I'll carry it now." The following weekend, the plaza was unusually still. Rain drummed softly against umbrellas, the crowd thinner than usual. Yet when Cole emerged, there was a tension awaiting. His boots rang out sharper against the wet stone. His rifle gleamed under the gray light. Halfway through, something subtle happened. When he reached the far end of the mat, he paused longer than regulation allowed. Then slowly, deliberately, he touched his hand to his pocket, where Emma's bracelet rested. The movement was barely visible, concealed within the discipline of his turn. But Laura saw. The veterans saw. And word spread like wildfire. "He's carrying her with him," someone whispered in the rain. The media seized on it again. Stories spread about the soldier who broke protocol not for himself, but for a little girl. Headlines spoke of dignity, sacrifice, humanity. Pictures of Emma beside the tomb went viral. A senator even mentioned her name in a speech on the Senate floor, calling her a child, who reminded us what honor truly means. Cole ignored it all. Fame meant nothing. His duty had not changed. Yet at night, alone in his quarters, he ran his thumb over the beads of the bracelet until the letters wore smooth. One late afternoon, as the sun broke through after days of rain, Laura stood at the plaza once more. She whispered into the wind, as she often did, talking to Emma. "He's still marching for you, baby. You're still here." Cole's steps echoed across the marble at that exact moment, crisp and unwavering. And for the first time since Emma's passing, Laura smiled, not the smile of forgetting, but the fragile smile of someone who knew memory could live in footsteps, in silence, in ritual. That night, Cole sat outside under the stars, bracelet still in his hand. For the first time, he allowed himself to speak aloud, not as a soldier, not as a guard, but as a man. "Caleb," he murmured into the dark, "I kept my word. She knew you through me, and I'll keep her with me until my last watch." A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of spring blossoms. He closed his eyes, and for one fleeting moment, he could almost hear Emma's voice, "Don't stop marching." And he knew he never would. Summer came in a blaze of heat, and with it crowds thicker than ever. Tourists, veterans, families, they all came drawn not just by the solemnity of the tomb, but by the story that had spread far beyond Washington. People carried small flags. Children wore bracelets with plastic beads spelling hope. And veterans saluted not only the tomb, but the memory of the little girl who had once lifted her flag with trembling hands. Cole remained the same in form, precise, stone-faced, unyielding, but inside he felt the difference. Each heel strike carried more than tradition now. It carried Emma's weight, her final plea, her eternal presence. His fellow guards noticed too. During late-night rotations, some whispered that Cole had become more than a sentinel. He was a man haunted, marching not only for the unknown dead, but for one child who had slipped between life and eternity. Laura had found a strange rhythm of grief. She visited often, sometimes daily, sometimes not for weeks. When she came, she stood silently at the edge, holding Emma's folded flag against her chest. She never called attention to herself, never spoke. Yet when Cole's boots rang out, she swore she could feel Emma beside her. One afternoon after his shift, Cole approached her. He carried something small in his hand wrapped in cloth. This was hers, he said simply, and handed her the bracelet. Laura shook her head. "No, she gave that to you. She wanted you to carry it." "I have," Cole said. His voice was steady, but his eyes were raw. "But it's not mine to keep forever. It belongs with you, with her family." Laura held it delicately as though it were a relic. "She thought of you as family too," she whispered. Maybe the only soldier who ever reminded her of her dad. Cole bowed his head, jaw tight. He didn't trust himself to speak. The nation's attention sharpened weeks later when Arlington announced a special tribute. They had never done anything like it before, a public ceremony honoring Emma's memory woven into the solemn ritual of the Guard. It stirred controversy, some traditionalists balked, but the outcry of support overwhelmed it. Veterans from across the country pledged to attend. The day arrived under a bright, searing sun. Thousands packed the hill. Flags rippled, voices hushed, and the air carried the electric tension of history in the making. Laura sat in the front row, Emma's folded flag on her lap, her hands trembling. When the bell struck, Cole emerged. His uniform shone, his rifle precise, but there was something else in him that day, an energy, a gravity. He marched with flawless cadence, every step echoing through the silence. The crowd did not shift or whisper. They barely breathed. At the midpoint of his watch, Cole halted. Slowly he turned, and in a motion that broke centuries of rigidity, he reached into his pocket. From it, he withdrew the bracelet. Emma's bracelet, the one she had left him. Holding it with reverence, he placed it at the base of the tomb of the unknown soldier. Gasps rippled through the plaza. Veterans snapped to salute. Mothers pulled children close. Laura covered her mouth, tears flooding. Cole resumed his march, never looking down, never faltering. But the bracelet remained a child's fragile testament against the eternal stone. The photographs spread instantly. Newspapers printed them. News anchors wept through retellings. Social media burned with the image of the soldier placing a child's token at the heart of America's most sacred memorial. Some called it a break in discipline. Others called it the purest act of duty the Guard had ever performed. Cole ignored it all. He had done what he promised. Emma had a place among the unknown, now her courage etched into marble and memory alike. That night, Laura visited once more. The crowd was gone. The plaza lit only by dim lamps. She stood before the tomb, the bracelet at its base. Closing her eyes, she whispered, "She's with them now. She's home." And somewhere in the distance, the echo of boots on stone answered back, steady, eternal, unbroken. The days following the ceremony took on a strange, sacred rhythm. Visitors came by the thousands, many leaving small offerings, a ribbon, a letter, a child's toy beside the bracelet at the tomb. Guards never spoke of it, but none removed them. Instead, they remained until the elements wore them away, as if the tomb itself had accepted them into its silent covenant. Laura returned often, though not as frequently as before. Each visit was different. Sometimes she wept. Sometimes she sat quietly for hours. Sometimes she smiled faintly at the children who asked their parents why the soldier marched so straight. She no longer clutched Emma's flag so tightly. Instead, she carried it folded in a glass case, protected, preserved, ready to pass down one day when words alone might fail. Cole continued his duty unchanged, yet wholly transformed. Every step he took was sharper, every turn crisper. Veteran said his cadence sounded heavier now, as if the marble itself carried the memory of a girl who had once lifted her own flag in defiance of pain. He remained silent, but the silence no longer felt hollow. It was full thick with the weight of promises kept. Late one evening, when his shift ended, Cole lingered at the plaza. The sky was black velvet, the stars scattered faintly above. He stood before the tomb helmet tucked under his arm rifle at his side. For the first time since Emma's passing, he allowed himself to speak aloud on that sacred ground. "You were right, Caleb," he murmured into the night. "She was stronger than either of us. Stronger than I'll ever be." The words echoed softly against the marble, then faded into the eternal silence. Cole bowed his head, then turned his boots, striking once more against stone, carrying him back into shadow. The months stretched into years. Generations of visitors came and went. Many never knew Emma's name, but they felt her story in the air and the reverence that lingered around the tomb. Children pointed at the guards and whispered about the little girl whose bracelet lay at the base. Teachers told her story alongside lessons of sacrifice. Veterans spoke her name with pride, as if she were one of their own. Laura eventually moved away from Arlington, seeking a quieter place to grow old. Yet every Memorial Day she returned. She would stand at the plaza, her hair silver now, and watch the guards march. And every time she felt Emma's presence, sometimes in the wind, sometimes in the sound of boots on marble, sometimes in the simple weight of silence that said more than words ever could. One day, years later, as the crowd hushed for the changing of the guard, a young boy tugged at his father's sleeve. "Why do they march like that?" he asked. The father smiled softly, pointing toward the tomb. "Because long ago, a little girl in a wheelchair asked them never to stop." The boy's eyes widened. "Did she really?" "Yes," the father said, "and they never did." The crowd fell silent again as the relief guard stepped into place. Boots rang rifles, gleamed faces stayed stone. Yet beneath it all, woven into every step, was Emma, her courage, her hope, her defiance of frailty. And so the soldiers' watch continued. The marble plaza echoed with footsteps that would never end, a rhythm older than grief and stronger than death. Each strike of heel to stone carried the weight of the unknown and the memory of one small girl who taught a guard, a mother, and a nation what it meant to endure. The bracelet remained weathered now, beads dulled but unbroken. Hope still spelled itself out letter by letter across the years. And as long as the tomb stood, as long as sentinels marched, Emma's story marched with them. If you like the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more similar stories. Now click on the video on the screen to hear another story that is equally powerful and compelling, with courage, sacrifice, and a choice that makes you question everything you know about duty and justice. Click on the video.